Hello, everyone. I'm Ida Cutler. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First in Chicago. We're one of the last remaining feminist bookstores in the United States, and we're so excited to host Peace Adzo Medie tonight in honor of the release of her new book, His Only Wife. We like to begin these events with a land acknowledgement. We're streaming this event in our bookstore in Chicago, and we are on the land that is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. If you're not in Chicago, I encourage you to look up and learn more about land acknowledgement and about the territory on which we're situated. If you still want to order His Only Wife, you haven't done so already, and read it up and gobbled it up and loved it like I have, you can do so at any time by going to our website, womenandchildrenfirst.com, or even easier, under buy the book, there's a little teal icon that you can click on, and it will take you to the website where you can order that title or any other book. We are also open for those of you who are in Chicago. Our store is open, which is why I'm sitting in a closet right now because there are people shopping outside. All of our hours are on our website. During the event, please be sure to drop a question for a piece by using the Ask a Question feature right over there where you can say something, just by dropping it in the chat. We're going to get to questions at the end of the event. So we have many events upcoming, all of which you can find out about on our website. On September 25th, we are hosting essayist Michelle Moreno for the launch of her new book, Like Love. On to tonight's event. Peace Adzo Medie is a Ghanaian writer and senior lecturer in gender and international politics at the University of Bristol in England. Prior to that, she was a research fellow at the University of Ghana. She has published several short stories, and her book, Global Norms and Local Actions, The Campaign to End Violence Against Women in Africa, will be published by Oxford University Press in 2020. Peace is joined tonight in conversation by Ayesha Harruna Attah. Ayesha is the author of 4 novels, Harmattan Ring, nominated for the 2010 Commonwealth Writers' Prize, Saturday's Shadows, The 100 Wells of Salaga, and a forthcoming young adult novel, The Deep Blue Between. I'm going to hide myself now, and I'm going to let these authors speak to the work. Thank you again for coming. I do notice somebody addressed the echo. I think that will go away once I leave the screen. And if it isn't, I will get to your question and figure out how to troubleshoot that. But I'm going to hide myself now and turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Ida, for that kind introduction. And it's nice to be joining you, Ayesha.
Nice to be joining you too. So where are you reading us from?
So I will start off a short reading, but before I do, I'll give a brief summary of the book so that everyone has an idea of what the story is about, and just to set the scene for this short reading. So His Only Wife is a story about a young woman in Ghana, Afi, who finds herself in an arranged marriage with Eli, who is a very wealthy man. And this is a marriage that has been arranged by Eli's mother, Auntie. And Auntie has been Afi's family benefactor since Afi's father died. And Auntie has arranged this marriage because she doesn't approve of Eli's partner. And what we learned from the very beginning, the very first line of the novel, is that Eli is absent from his own wedding. So we know that Eli does not show up for his wedding. And it isn't until after several weeks of marriage that Afi gets to meet her husband. So I'm going to read from when the first meeting that Afi has with Ellie after they've been married for several weeks. Ellie came at 1:36 p.m. I knew the exact time because I was sitting and staring at a clock on my phone when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me and I dropped the phone. I hadn't heard the lift stop and open on my floor. My mother rushed out of her room and mouthed go while pointing to the door. I hesitated. For some silly reason, I wanted to fish my phone from under the chair before I answered the door. Ah, open the door, she said with sound this time. I stood up and smoothed my dress over my hips. My armpits were moist. It was a good thing that the fabric was light and patterned so that my sweat stains would not be visible. My feet felt heavy, so that I needed extra efforts to lift them. I imagined that I looked like a marching soldier. The frown on my mother's face told me that she was displeased. The bell rang a second time. She flashed her eyes as if they had the power to physically push me toward the door. My hand was so damp with sweat that it slipped off the round doorknob when I tried to turn it. I wiped my hands on my dress and tried again. This time I was successful. Ellie broke into a smile that reached his eyes when he saw me. He was leaning against the door frame like someone who had been waiting for a long time to be let in. Please, good afternoon, I managed to say in a near whisper. Should I shake his hand? Should I hug him? A kiss on the cheek? Last night I had imagined hugging him, but now no greeting seemed right for this almost stranger who was also my husband. It didn't help that he was jauntily leaning against the doorframe and openly staring at me, his smile intact. Afternoon, Afi, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. I lowered my eyes to look at my hands, and then my feet, anything to avoid the intensity of his gaze. Please come in for Ellie, I heard my mother say from somewhere behind me. Only then did he look past me into the flat. I breathed a soft sigh of relief and stepped aside to let him in. So I will stop there.
That was really lovely reading. Thank you, Peace. So can
Thank
we
you.
start by telling the readers where you're reading from?
Do you mean
Can you hear me?
yes, do you mean my physical location?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I'm in Bristol in the UK.
Okay. And I'm
Yes.
I'm I'm interviewing you from Senegal.
Yes.
I think it's important for us to locate ourselves in time and space because it's a new world, it's a different way of being, and I don't
Yes.
want us to lose sight of physicality.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about this really beautiful book that's had amazing reviews. How are you feeling?
I am. I think the best part about having the book out is that people seem to be enjoying it. I am a voracious reader, although I don't get to read as much fiction as I would like because of my other social science reading that I have to do. But one thing that I enjoy about being a reader is this process or this when you find yourself absorbed in a book and just carried away by the story and thoroughly entertained. And I remember being a child and thinking that books were almost magical and thinking that writers were like so amazing that they could create this feeling where you could just disappear into a book and disappear into a new world. So for me to think that I would write a book and people would enjoy it in that way is just like the best thing ever. So yes, it's amazing. The best part is that people are reading the book and people are enjoying it, and that just makes me so happy.
It is a wonderful book. Look at my notes. I can stop taking notes. It really is stunning. But
Love
I
to see
think,
that.
yeah, kept taking notes. I think we could start by you telling us a bit about yourself because you said that you're a voracious reader, but you can't do that now because of your other engagements. So, who is Peace? She's a novelist and an academic. Could you tell us more?
Yes, so I'm a social scientist. I'm a scholar. I teach at the University of Bristol. My my teachings, I mainly teach international relations, human rights, gender and politics. So those are the areas in which I specialize. And I'm also a researcher, and a lot of my research has been on gender and conflict in Africa for the most part. So I've done field work studying the police in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, and now I am studying women traditional leaders in Ghana. So my first major research projects in Ghana, and I'm very excited about that.
Wow. It sounds like you have your plate full. How do you manage to write a novel? You published an academic book earlier this year, conduct research, and teach. Probably you advise a lot of students as well. How do you juggle all of these different roles?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I've been asking myself that now, like, how did I do it? It's almost like someone else was able to balance all of that. But it's it's been a lot of work, is what I would say. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of very early hours and very late nights trying to do all of these things. And I think I've been able to do it just because of my love of fiction. So it's just the love of fiction. I began writing when I was about 10, and there's been times where I've written a lot, and times where I haven't written at all. But over the last like 30 years, I've always been writing fiction. And I think it's just the love of story that has kept me going, and that has made it possible for me to balance all of these parts of my life.
So it sounds like the love of fiction came first. Why did you decide to go into academia versus being a full-time writer? I know it's an impossible ask, but what went through that process? What was your thinking? Was it pressure from family? What could it have been?
Oh, well, actually, no. I started writing for my own entertainment. So I just read so much. I grew up, so Ho is featured in the book. Part of my childhood was in Ho, and I read so much. I read everything in the library. I borrowed books from people, and so at a point in time, there was just no no more books left for me to read, and I just started writing books for myself. So I was about 10, 11 at that time. But so for me, fiction was always for my own consumption. it I Yeah, so I never really thought of it as a career or something that I would produce and that will be read publicly. I remember being like in my early teens and like mailing short stories to competitions in like South Africa or something, and of course I didn't get selected. So I think that was the extent of me trying to get published. So but most of my writing was just for my own consumption, and even after I had so many books to read, the habit of writing for myself and just the fact that I enjoyed it, I kept doing it, but I didn't think of it as a career. So yeah, it was, I don't think it was ever on the table for discussion that I would do fiction as opposed to something else.
Okay. And what was that turning point for this book specifically? What was the point where you thought, okay, I can produce this for other people to read, not just
Mm,
myself? How
mm.
did this book begin?
Well, so I started working on the book. I started thinking about this character of Afi, and she went through several iterations. But I was in Boston at the time. I was based at Boston College working on my dissertation. And I started thinking about this character. But also, as I was writing working on my dissertation, I began reading fiction a lot again. So when I started a PhD, I almost stopped reading fiction. There was just so much. Like I used to go to the library, and I used to take a suitcase to the library for my academic books.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, yeah, and drag a suitcase on the bus in Pittsburgh to my apartment. So there was just very little time for me to read fiction. But when I was working on the dissertation, I began reading fiction again. And I also, I think, began reading a lot of African writers and just getting very interested in this conversation about African writers and producing literature on Africa, literature that portrays Africans. So I think that's what contributed to me wanting to write for someone else other than myself.
Okay. And now we're on the topic of writing. I'm interested in your process. So it's a two-pronged question. What is your writing process, and how does it differ from academic writing now that you've done both? Is, does one feed into the other? So it's actually three-pronged.
So my process, I do a lot of my writing happens in my head, and I spend a lot of time thinking about characters, sometimes years thinking about characters before I begin writing anything. But once I begin writing, it really flows. But the initial period of thinking can take months and often years for me um to get to the point that I can begin physically writing. So like I said, this character, this only wife, I started thinking about this character, I think in like 2011.
Wow.
But it wasn't until like early 2013, late 2012, early 2013 that I began writing earnestly about, that I began writing this book. So there's this long process of just thinking through scenarios and plots and characters and all of that. But how does this differ from academic writing? I mean, I do also do a lot of just conceptualizing in my mind and outlining in my mind when it comes to my academic writing. But then academic writing, I also find is so different in that you have all the requirements about theory and empirical evidence and your methodology, and those are things that I don't have to deal with when I write fiction. And for that reason, I find fiction to be so. And I should say I love academic writing, and the fact that I continue to do it, I guess, shows that I love it. But I do find writing fiction to be very freeing, in that I'm not constrained by all of these rules about, so you're saying this, what evidence do you have to support this, right? I don't, I mean, of course there are rules to writing fiction, but not the kind that I deal with in academic writing. So that is I guess that's a difference. But my academic writing did influence His Only Wife, in that, or my academic research influenced His Only Wife, in that I was spending a lot of time in my research talking to survivors of intimate partner violence in the field, so in both Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire. And something that stood out to me was this point that people will make about how they wanted to leave abusive relationships that had physical violence, and yet they stayed because they were under pressure from relatives or pressure from friends. And so that got me really thinking about why women enter relationships and why they stay in relationships. So even though there is no violence, with physical violence within this relationship, and that was my one rule when writing this book, that there'll be no physical violence in the book. But at the same time, I wanted to explore this theme about, how women are influenced by the people around them, and how, the decisions of others or the words of others shape the decisions that we make. So that is how my academic work kind of fed into the novel.
And I'm very curious about what you just said about your no violence rule. We spoke a little bit a few weeks ago, and I remember you saying the work you do sometimes gets so heavy that this book was almost a reprieve from that. Is that why you chose not to include violence at all?
Yes. I one of the reasons that I write fiction is like my break from my academic work. So, after whatever long days or long weeks of writing, I like to turn to fiction. And just writing about violence can be very, like you said, it's heavy. It's very heavy material, and it can be very emotionally draining. And of course, it's not the same as what the people who actually experience the violence that you talk to are going through. But at the same time, as researchers, we are affected by the conversations that we have. So for me, it was just very important that this book, even if it's dealing with similar themes like my academic work, not have violence. But something else that influenced this decision was that when I interview people for my research, I tell them that I'm going to write a social science book, a book that would hopefully influence policy, a book that will advance um, scholarly or academic knowledge. I didn't tell them that I was going to write a novel, right? So I wasn't comfortable um, writing about physical
Mining them.
violence
Okay.
in a way that I was mining their story. This doesn't mean that I don't write about violence. I write about violence in my work, but I was just very careful in that I didn't want it to seem that I was mining their story in any way. So there's always, I mean, it's an interesting kind of line to walk, in that unconsciously my research influences what I do, influences the way I think about things. So I just have to be very conscious in that I'm not picking particular people's stories and bringing it into my fiction, especially because I have not, first of all, told them, but also because I think one of the joys of fiction is just being able to create people, imaginary people, and I find that to be so much fun. So anyway, I wanted to separate my fiction from my nonfiction.
Okay. And you've never felt tempted here and there from a juicy story, the violence aside, just a story you heard that made you go, this is just the stuff of fiction and I have to use it. You've never felt that tempted.
No,
Okay.
no, but I think it's also because like I have a backlog of stories in my head. So I'm I'm just trying to process all of the ones I have already and get them out, that I'm generally not looking at, like, thinking about my research or individuals in my research as sources for my fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'd like you to read a second short extract, if that's possible,
Mm,
just to give readers more of a flavor, and then we'll dive into the book after that.
sure. So this one I'm reading from page 4, and this is when so it's the wedding, and like I said, the groom does not show up for the wedding, and this scene is when Afi is getting ready, getting dressed, and waiting for the wedding to start, for the ceremony to start. Mausi, one of Togan Pius's daughters and the cousin to whom I was closest, strolled out of the bedroom and began dabbing my face. My eyelids fluttered closed as a white handkerchief, which she wielded like a surgical tool, migrated from the bridge of my nose to my forehead. It was immediately replaced by a sponge from a compact that had been fished out of a small rhinestone-encrusted clutch tucked into her armpit. "It's enough," I said in protest as she slightly brushed my cheeks. This was the 5th time that she had touched up my makeup in the last hour. I couldn't have been sweating that much. I was nervous. I wasn't nervous, not then anyway. I was mostly weary. Since my mother told me that I'll be marrying Ellie, I felt as though I was balancing our 2 families like a basin of water, which was full to the brim, on my head. It wasn't easy being the key to other people's happiness, their victory, and their vindication. I desperately wanted the wedding to be over because then I would have done my part, or rather, I would have begun to do my part. "Ah, it's okay. You're only adding to my stress with all this makeup," I protested when Mausi's hand and the makeup sponge continued to hover in my face. "Stress? Haven't I told you to relax? There's nothing to be stressed about. You should be happy and smiling." She was glaring at a small pimple on my chin as she spoke. "You make everything sound so simple. I barely know the man. And what if things don't work out? What if this marriage doesn't make him leave the woman? What if it doesn't bring him closer to his family? What if I let everyone down? His family, my mother, this whole town. I couldn't sleep last night just thinking about this. I said in a whisper because we weren't alone. Everybody says he's a good man, so there's no need to be afraid. I'll stop there.
Beautiful. I'm glad you read this extract for one tiny reason. That clutch with, rhyme with a jewel crusted tones, it made me think about one review that described your book as the crazy rich Asians of West Africa, of Ghana. What did that review do to you? What did you think when you read that? What was your reaction?
I so I of course when I wrote it, I didn't think of it as crazy with rich Asians of West Africa or of anywhere else for that matter. But something that I've learned very quickly is that once the book goes out, it's out there. And I'm whatever readers see in it, that is what they see in it. Right. So I'm not very concerned about how people are interpreting it. Um, I think it's fine. People read it and whatever they see and whatever they like in it, that's what they like and that's what they take out of it. And as long as people are enjoying it, I'm happy.
And talking of people enjoying it, Ghanaians are going to be reading this book as well. One reader described it as a very Ghanaian book. What do you
Hmm.
think that even means? What does it take for a book to be Ghanaian?
Well, I mean, it could mean so many different things. I mean, it could mean just a book being set in Ghana.
Mhm.
It could be dealing with themes that are kind of common in Ghana. It could be seeing words in Ghanaian languages. It could be seeing food because I love food. So like I just talk about food a lot in my fiction. It could be seeing Ghanaian food. So yes, I think maybe it's just seeing things that are very familiar to us that makes it Ghanaian.
Okay. And this idea of place is interesting. You set the book beginning in Ho, and then Afi moves to Accra. And for your non-Ghanaian readers, this might not mean a lot. I've read some of the reviews that describe it as going from the village to the big city, but that's not true. It's going from one city to another.
Mm.
And yet, it could come with its own share of culture shock for Afi. Can you talk about this? Why do you set the book in Ho? I know you grew up there, but what was the impetus for having your character be there and then move to Accra?
Mm, mm. I think Afi's story is a story about growth and it's a story about change. And so it was important for me to put her in situations that were not familiar and situations that would force her to grow as a person. And I think if we think Accra is it's like is the biggest city in Ghana, right? So if you're going to leave a place like Ho and go anywhere else, it's going to be Accra, and that is where you're going to see the most difference between your experience anywhere in Ghana and Accra. So definitely this contrast. I think Accra, if you want a contrast anywhere in Ghana, it's Accra and a smaller town or a smaller city. Yes, so that is why I wanted I placed her in Ho and then she moved to Accra because I wanted this contrast and this opportunity for her to grow and change and using place as a way of kind of propelling that change.
And it's amazing the way you go from being crowded in her uncle's compound to this almost isolated building, this luxurious building in Accra. The reader definitely gets a sense of change. And Afi will go back home at some point. I won't give away too much. And she misses her new home at that point. It's amazing how you use place to show that Afi is evolving as a person. It's amazing. So, Afi has lots of relationships over the course of the book. Of course, the biggest one is with Elikim, but I think the second most important one is that of the relationship with her mother.
Mm.
And on page 31, at this point when Afi is suffering, she hasn't seen her husband, she's wondering what situation she's wound herself into. She says something to her mother, and her mom says, "I'm your mother? Why would I send you somewhere to suffer?" And yet, as the book wears on, we realize that Afi does really suffer because of this relationship. Can you tell us more about the mother-daughter dynamic?
Mm, mm. Well, I feel and her mother, in some ways, their relationship is unique in that we also learned from the beginning that Afi's father is dead, and that it's just been Afi and her mother. And Afi does feel this sense of responsibility. She's an only child, and she feels that it's her duty to take care of her mother. So that it's like there's on one level, it's mother and daughter, but on another level, there's this, she feels that she's obliged, she has this obligation, this responsibility to care for her mother. And it drives the narrative, because what we find is that behind a lot of what Afi does is this thought that I need to do things for my mother. I need to take care of my mother, right? So they have this very unique relationship in that way, but also it's one of the things that changes over time in the book, right? That we see the relationship begin to, at places it seems that it's coming apart, and at places it seems that it's getting firmer. So it's also one of the things in the book that's subject to change and evolves as the story progresses.
Mm-hmm. And talking about Afi's other relationships, I love the friendships She has. Some of them are her childhood friendships. Some of them are with people she's meeting along this journey. Um, can you talk about the friendships as well? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, the friendships are extremely important, and in many ways, I use Afi's friendships to bring in perspectives that are different from hers, and to basically introduce her to people that are different. And these people, through this friendship, she's also forced to see things in a different way, and she's forced to question some of what she believes because of the friendships. So there are friends that agree with her, and there are friends that do not agree with her. But the friends are also key to how she develops as an individual through the story.
I love the way you praise that. It also shows your process of writing. So when you began writing this book, I know you thought about it for a while, but did you plot the book out? Did you know who the characters would be? That this was the role of, Yaya, to be sort of an encourager and yet the person who keeps her in check when she steps out of line.
Mm.
How did you craft your characters?
Mm, mm. So yeah, so there's a lot of pre-writing
Sorry,
plotting
the
that goes
animals
on.
on my side are making noise. I hope they're not disturbing everybody else.
Um, maybe when I'm talking, you can mute your mic.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think I totally got distracted by the dogs and lost my train of thought. What is the question again?
Let me come back on. I was talking about how you crafted your characters. I don't know if they're gonna stop when they get started. It's a nightmare. I think they stop.
um,
Yeah, craft.
yeah. How did I craft my characters? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it happening in my head, but at the same time, I always think I know what's going to happen, and I begin writing, and like the characters take on a life of their own. So like some of the friends that Afi has in the book were not friends that were initially there when I was plotting, and outlining the book. But as you begin writing, it's as if people just become necessary, and like you just know there's someone needed in this story, and you usher them in. So yes, I think that's how quite a few of my characters come to be, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that as I write, the story begins to deviate from what I had planned, because for me, it's just evidence of the characters developing and becoming less me and more themselves. So I love that part about writing.
Okay, the animals are quiet now. No more distractions, I hope. So you are a plotter. You plot the novel.
Mm-hmm.
How much detail do you go into?
At least I have. So I should say, when I began writing, I was like the kind of person who would just take a pen and be like, I'm going to write without any idea of what was going to happen. That's how I started writing fiction. But I think I began plotting because of my academic work, in that with academic writing, you are spending, before you even do anything, before you go into the field, you've developed proposals and outlines and abstracts. So I think that's influenced me as a fiction writer, in that now I've become this person who's like planning things. So before I began writing, I have a good idea of the beginning, the middle, and the end. But at least with this book, the first of all, the ending changed. This wasn't the ending that was planned, which and I'm fine with that. But also a lot of the middle changed. So yes, there's a lot of plotting, but at the same time, it's like I'm not always in control of what the characters do and what they want, and that to me is one of the joys of writing fiction.
And when you talk about the beginning, that delicious line, delicious first line that just lays out everything we're going to deal with in the novel. Did that come instantly, or was that something that you reworked over time?
Mm. So by the time I had finished the first chapter, I had a version of that first line that communicated that important piece of information. So it was there very early on. It wasn't the first line that I wrote. I don't think so. But when I look back on my first draft, the first chapter, there was a version of that first line, because
Amazing.
I always knew that it would be an unconventional marriage, an unconventional relationship. So it was important for me that the first line made that clear to the reader.
Okay. And those are sometimes the hardest to write. It sets the tone for the whole novel. So,
Mm.
yeah. There are so many questions I have, and the clock is ticking. So let me dive right into another one, which is the idea of beauty. I think that's a theme that you play around with a lot, because Afi is considered a beautiful woman. On page 49, let me just pull it up. She's described described here as of beautiful face, flesh at the right places, and fair skin. It seems like a very Ghanaian description of beauty as well. And then this is in contrast with our named competition, the woman who has Ellie's attention, who is described as almost as a man.
Mm.
Can you tell us more about this contrast between the two women?
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, your interest in writing about beauty.
Yeah, so we one of the things we learned early on is that one of the reasons that Afi is selected as the wife is that she's considered beautiful. She has light skin, she's curvy, and she has a pretty face. And we learned that the other woman is the opposite of all of that. She's dark skinned, she is not curvy, and it's kind of like you said, it's kind of a reflection of how we think about beauty in Ghana in many places. But for me, I really wanted to pursue this thing with colorism, right? I really wanted to kind of explore it, but also to challenge it. And I'm glad that you caught it. It doesn't seem not. I'm not sure that everyone like catches that like the point I'm trying to make about colorism, but so I'm just excited that you saw it and you caught it. But yes, in many ways it was an attempt for me to excavate these ideas about beauty, what we consider beauty, and why do we consider certain features beautiful, right? So that's one thing that I try to do, but also to kind of challenge it, to push back against it. And I think the ending, as you say, I love writing that ending. I love that ending. Um, yeah. And
Yeah.
part of in some ways that ending was very political about issues about beauty and skin color and all of that. I really wanted to push those things or to push back against those ideas in the book.
Yeah, I can't wait for the reader to get to that point because you almost don't expect it, and it's so beautifully rendered that moment. I won't say too much because if I do, I'll give away what it is. But it was gorgeous. It was such a gorgeous ending, and that you say was a change that came later on in the writing, or did you already have that from the beginning?
Well, I
Like
think I always knew that like there will be this physical difference between them, but I didn't know from the beginning that the ending was when I would like pick apart the different threads for everything to unravel, in that way, in the way that everything came apart.
Mhm.
Yes.
It was beautiful. And close to the issue of beauty is the one of sex, which this book doesn't shy away from.
Mm.
How did you write your sex scenes? Did you enjoy them? Has your
Mm.
mother read the book?
My mother has not yet read the book. Um, my siblings have read the book, but not my parents yet. Yeah, I really wanted to write about sex, and it was for me it was a political act as well, right? That we don't, as women, like good women in some contexts, are not supposed to talk about sex and are not supposed to like sex. And so for me, it was very important to kind of make sex something that was normal in that way and something that wasn't controversial. And I wanted to write about women that enjoy sex, right? And not to make a fuss about it, right? But also, I think to interrogate our ideas about sex that cause women to, well, in some settings, that cause women to feel uncomfortable about expressing desire, about expressing their wants within romantic relationships.
I thought you did that really beautifully. And then there's the character of Evelyn, who is a woman who is very free in her sexuality.
Mm.
And yet she's looked down upon by Elikem's family, Elikem's entire family. Can you talk a little bit about Ghanaian society as well and its relationship with women like Evelyn?
Mm, mm. I mean, I still think, and I think it's important to say that there's a great deal of differences across Ghana, right? But I still think we tend to not, what's the best way of putting it? I think women like Evelyn still are not seen as good women by many people, right? The fact that you're independent, the fact that you speak what you want, the fact that you're like, I love sex, or that I have transactional relationships. I think those are things that
Very
are
important.
still.
Go ahead.
I think those are things that are frowned on by too many people. And so once again, so I guess a lot of what I was writing was to kind of push back against these notions that exist many places in our society about who's a good woman, what constitutes a good wife, right? And I think Evelyn is a character that unapologetically pokes holes in all of those things.
Okay. And let's take a few questions
Mm-hmm.
as the clock ticks. And then I'll come back if there's more time for more questions. So the first question is, what was your favorite book as a child that helped inspire you to become a writer?
Mm, mm. I think so. Well, one of the books I remember being obsessed with the Sweet Valley series. Yes, and I enjoyed those books, but I didn't necessarily want to become a writer because of the books I was reading. Like I said, I wrote because I just wanted more books for my own consumption. So it wasn't like I want to write books like these for other people to consume. It was just like I want to be entertained, so I'm going to write books for myself.
Okay. And then the next question is, how long have you been writing professionally?
Well, fiction and professionally. So this is my this is my first novel that I began writing late 2012, 2013, and completed about around 2017. I think late 2017 is when I had a complete draft. So I guess professional, since it's been published, I guess it's considered the professional period of my fiction writing. So I would say since 2012.
Next question asks if you've listened to your audiobook, if you had a chance to listen to the audiobook version of your novel.
I've listened to parts of it. I haven't listened to the entire audiobook yet. I've listened to parts of it, and it's narrated by this awesome narrator Sunila Nankani, who does a really great job with it. Yeah, but I haven't listened to the. I think it's like 9 hours. I haven't listened to the entire thing yet.
And what's that experience? It's your work translated into another form as well, right? You're hearing your words, but through somebody else's voice.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
And I think it's one of the reasons I haven't listened to the entire thing yet. It's like, oh my goodness, I wrote that, and I'm still trying to get
Familiar and
comfortable.
unfamiliar all at once, right?
Yeah, it's only. I mean, it took me a while to be able to read the physical book, the paper book, and not cringe. Like, oh my goodness, I wrote that, and people are going to see it. Oh no! So I still need to build up I guess, the confidence to when I can listen to the entire audiobook.
Yeah. It's like that. But then I think with time you go back and then you're surprised pleasantly. I don't know. I don't know if we ever lose that disconnect that you have with something that you've actually done yourself. So the question, it's a second part question to the first one I just asked. Have you already started dreaming of the next novel?
Yeah, so the next novel is in the editing phase now. So there's a bit more writing to do, but mostly editing as well. So yes, I am now. It's the third novel that's been occupying me for a while now. I'm struggling with, so all of this, most of this is in my head. So I'm trying to figure out how it's going to end. So yeah, that's where I am now, and loving the process.
And what about the second novel? Because you said this is the third novel. So there's a second novel already out in the works?
Well, yeah. So the second novel is being edited. Well, it was returned to me today, so I guess it's now back. It's now back with me
in your court.
Yes, and I now have some more work to do with it. Yeah, but it's a novel set partly in Ghana, partly in the US, and it explores the themes of friendship. So I'm really interested in friendship and how friendships change over time. So it follows two Ghanaian girls over several years, decades, and see their friendship come apart and come together again. Yes.
Ooh, sounds like my kind of book. And there's a fourth question for you. If you will do a book tour after COVID-19 restrictions are lifted?
I don't. Maybe. I don't. I don't know. can I just say it's hard for me to think for like, I've gotten to a place where I just like, what's happening tomorrow? COVID has made it such that I struggle with long-term planning. As you can see, I can barely articulate my I can barely articulate anything when you ask me what are you doing in a month. So yeah, I don't know. It would be nice. I mean, the book is going to be published in the UK in the spring.
Okay.
I don't know how much things would have changed by then, but if the situation allows, I would definitely do a book tour then.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, what a time to release a debut as well. To do everything virtually.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, so maybe we can ask some more questions before the end. I was fascinated by Afi's paternal family names. So there's Uncle Bias, there's Illustrious, there's Wisdom. I mean, I think I know why, but I want you to
So
tell the
I did.
audience about this.
So thank you. I'm so glad you. I think you're the first person who's asked me that, and I'm so happy that you caught that. This was just me having fun with names. So I'm Ewe, and we get
It's an
creative with
ethnic
our
group in
names,
Ghana.
right? I'm Peace, and
Peace.
Peace is like one of the most like okay simpler ones, but we can get very creative with our names. And I think when the names are in Ewe, they're just beautiful. But then when you translate into English, some of them can be quite interesting. So totally, I was having fun. I don't know anyone called excellent or illustrious, but still, I thought I'm just going to have fun with these names because I'm certain that there's an Ewe person somewhere with that name.
For sure.
So yeah.
For sure.
So yeah, I was just having fun with those names, and I'm happy that you caught that.
No, it was such a delight for me because exactly, there are definitely some inside jokes that I like, highlighting. Um, can we talk about girl power? Because I think this book is all about that. Even the book's villainess, who was called like a Don Corleone by one of your reviewers. Even she's a powerful figure. She reminds me of like the market woman who has made a lot for herself. Um, yeah, talk about girl power and his only wives.
Well, I'm very interested in women navigating the everyday and doing things big and small to advance themselves, to stand up for themselves, to say what they want to say. So yes, I really wanted this to be a major theme in the book. But it was also important for me that even small acts that might not be seen as powerful could be seen as powerful, and that I could contextualize them in such a way that the reader will grasp how something as simple as saying, no, I'm not going to do that, constitutes a major achievement or a major action on the part of a character. And I think it just reflects reality that everyday people, I mean, people do really amazing things and we hear about it in the news, but then people in their own small way do heroic things. Yeah, saying no, speaking up, telling people what you think, that is powerful, and that is important, and that is something I wanted to communicate in the book.
And you do it with even the minor characters. There's one who's my favorite. She's Afi's cousin who at the wedding, is keeping people from being greedy. I loved her, and I love that she came back at the end of the book. People need to read the book because even minor characters have that kind of agency. So that was amazing. And there's another question I had. It's kind of a big one because I think the book also tackles class in Ghanaian society. I think that's actually a big theme of the book. Afi goes from sort of upper middle class to lower class, and then she's just pushed into the highest rank of her society suddenly. So can you tell us a bit about your what you were trying to do with that?
Well, I think what I wanted to do was to show how class shapes women's lives. I think something that I asked readers to think about was, would this marriage have been even proposed if Afi came from a middle class family? Or if Afi came from a wealthy family? Would you go up to the family of a wealthy young woman and say, I want to propose an arranged marriage? Right? I mean, I think that's something to think about. Would Afi have said yes if she was from a well-off family? Would she have been treated in like the way she was treated if she was from a well-off family? So one of the things I wanted to do was to explore how class really influences how people are treated, especially young women, but also kinds of boxes young women in and limits the options such that people are forced to do things that they might not normally do if they had the social status, if they had the money to advance themselves the way they want to.
And in that regard as well, Afi's father, who is not a character in the book, but whose presence we feel and absence at the same time we feel, is a key figure because at some point we wonder if he were there, would this have happened to Afi? Can you talk about using him in that role as well?
Well, I think he's very useful because one of the things that's propelling Afi as well as her mother is kind of the change in their social status, right? And having the father there was very important for them to have a comfortable life. And like you said, his absence meant that they no longer had some of the comforts that they were used to. So in his absence, I wanted to show how, changing status, social status, economic status, how that can affect women's lives.
Okay. So let's do some light questions too now because the book has a lot of levity. The fashion. Afi is a seamstress. How much
Yes.
fun was that to write? Did you have to do research for that, for writing Afi's character?
Well, I did do some research, although I also was surrounded by seamstresses at a point in my childhood. So I kind of have a good idea of what it's like um, I don't know, being around sewing machines and how people come up with designs and whatnot. So I did have some of this knowledge, but I wasn't as up to date on current fashions and what is considered fancy and all of that. So I did do some research. I was like on Instagram and trying to see what the cool people were wearing. So there was definitely, yes, some research involved in getting up to date on the fashion.
And food, you mentioned that as well. Food plays a
Oh
big
yeah.
role.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't write when I'm hungry because I think that leads me to write about food a lot. And I think when I'm not in Ghana, I think about Ghanaian food a lot. So and part of the book was written when I was not in Ghana. So
Mm.
that might have, in my longing and my hunger, I might have been fantasizing about food, and some of it ended up in the book.
No, but like that opening scene where the aunties are, you know, behind big bowls of soup, and then the people inside and the people outside. I thought it was just so nicely done, and it really
Yeah,
does.
because
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, because there's like, food is very social, but there's an economic element to it as well, right? What do rich people eat, and how do rich people eat? Who uses a fork and a knife, and who eats with their hands, right? So these are, I think that the food, there's a social and an economic element to the food as well.
It killed me because there's this dance between, yeah, traditional and modern, and the urban and not so urban. So Afi's in her new apartment. She has these shiny fixtures around her, and then she puts Kobe in the fridge. Kobe's salted fish. It just wasn't. It didn't go with the place at all. So you do that as well. But that's also living in Ghana. right?
Yes, yes, yes. But I think a big part of it also is this idea that women, it doesn't matter how accomplished you are, you should be a good cook. And the notion is that it is like what's that expression? The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Like people take that thing very seriously, right? You need to cook. Yes, it doesn't matter if you have a medical degree and you save lives. You had better come home and cook. And I've heard ridiculous things like, oh, you shouldn't feed your husband food that has been refrigerated, right? So if you both have a job where you work from 9 to 5, you're supposed to come home and make sure there's fresh food on the table every single day. So I mean, those are things that, of course, cause me to roll my eyes. But maybe I shouldn't say that. But it does. It's like I can't. I mean, how is it that we both work long hours doing the same job, and then we come home, and then the woman is supposed to care for the children and cook, and that is her. All of that is her responsibility. And so I feel it's being told that if you do those kinds of things, your marriage will work. And I think a big part of it is, well, does it work? Because I feel definitely invest in cooking and cleaning to please this man.
At the point of, firing the cleaners and trying to, kick the cooks out of the way. It's definitely some funny moments. Yeah. So is there a message that you want the reader to be left with? I know it tackles so many issues, but if there were a kernel of something you'd want the reader to take away, what's the thing that piece wants? The readers will have the interpretations, as you said earlier, but what's the one thing you want the reader to ruminate on or to take away?
Well, I think something that's important for me is that people recognize that the path to whether it's independence or empowerment or growth or development is often not a straight one. It's a very winding path. Um, and it's also to say that like notions of feminism, getting to a place where you are feminist or whatever, however it is that you want to identify, is often not straight for many people. It's often not linear and it's often not simple. There's a lot of, and we see Afi, she takes one step forward, she takes 2 steps back. And I think that is the reality. That is how it is for many people. And progress is often frustrating, progress is often slow, but that is just the world. And so that's something that I really wanted to articulate, and that's something that I hope shines through when the book is read.
Thank you. It's beautiful. I think we can end with a last reading. Oh,
sorry. Oh, no.
Something,
I can hide myself again.
just something to whet the appetite of your reader, because it's an amazing book.
Okay, I will. I should read about food. So, just since we're talking about the politics of food and how food is so important, I will just, the first meeting where Afi and Ellie share a meal, or he eats and she watches, I'm going to read from there. I sat on the edge of the dining chair and began to take slices of yam out of the Pyrex bowl and place them onto his plate, as I seen my mother do for my father when he would come back from work. That's okay, he said after I had placed the fourth slice on his plate. Please, do you want garden egg or contomere? I asked in a small voice, suddenly afraid that he would not like either. I will start with the contomere, he said. I quickly began to scoop the grains onto his plate, careful to drain the excess palm oil out of the spoon before serving him. I hoped that my fast movements would prevent him from noticing my shaking hand. He began to eat as soon as I finished. He smiled after swallowing the very first mouthful. Very good, he said, and dug in again. I beamed, pleased with myself. I wish my mother had been there to hear him, and Auntie as well.
Thank you.
We can see you, Ida.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Hi. Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation and the reading. And thank everyone who is watching for coming. Just want to show the two books again. This one. You can order these books from our website. And again, if you're in Chicago, we are open now, so you're welcome to come by. Thank you again, and have a good night. That's all.
Thank you, Ida. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for
so
being
much.
Thank you,
here.
everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.